And share my screen for you guys. So, um, so last week we finished up chapter 6. Um, this week, I want to try and do all of Genesis 7. Um, Mostly because really Genesis 7 and 8 go together. Um, and everything that I want to say about them kind of goes together. I don't know how much we're gonna get stuck on individual points or whatnot. Um, but so we're gonna try and do the whole thing. So here we go. Then the Lord said to Noah, "Go into the ark, all you and all your household, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and his mate, and a pair of the animals that are and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and his mate, and 7 pairs of the birds of heaven, also male and female, to keep their offspring alive on the face of all the earth. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground. And Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters came upon the earth, and Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood, of the clean animals and of the animals that are not clean, and of the birds and of everything that keeps on the ground. Two and two, male and female, went into the ark with Noah as God commanded Noah. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all of the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of heaven were open, and rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with him entered the ark. They and every beast according to its kind, and all the livestock according to their kinds, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, every winged creature. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female, all flesh, went in as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. The flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and greatly increased on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all of the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. And all flesh dried that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, and all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. Okay. Um, so one of the things that I mentioned last time that we didn't really talk about much, and we haven't talked about it as much as I have in the past with other Bible studies, is the whole JEDP theory. And so I wanted to talk about it here because I think it's such a clear example of um, one, why you could think someone would believe in the documentary hypothesis, but also at the same time, so clearly demonstrate the problems with it. Um, and so basically, really anywhere in the Pentateuch, where you have a story where the main points are sort of repeated, you're going to have a proponent of JEDP, or the documentary hypothesis. Remember, those are interchangeable terms. You're going to have proponents of that theory say, oh, look, this is an example of it. You can see it because they're different. And so what they'll say is, well, like, one source is from E, the other is from J, and then the other is from P. Oh, almost none of Genesis is going to be from D. D stands for Deuteronomy. Almost the entire book of Deuteronomy gets lumped in with D. So usually the arguments are over J and E, with like some P, like priestly stuff, put in here or there. And the idea is that these are supposed to be independent sources. They're supposed to be independent stories, and then the editor of the Bible is putting them together. And so, just as a reminder, at the end of Genesis 7, right, we have God telling Noah to do all of this stuff, and then we have him telling him to do it again, only this time there's differences. So what are the differences? One of the main differences is that uh, he's supposed to be bringing 7 pairs of all clean animals. So previously, there wasn't really a distinction given between clean and unclean animals. Here it is. Here there is. He's bringing 7 of them. So there's a difference in the number of animals. There's a difference also in that there's a more accurate time frame given as to when this is said. It said 7 days before the rain comes. And then the other thing is that there's no mention of how to make the ark here. And so, to me, this shows how that documentary hypothesis breaks down. Because if you want to say that they're from independent stories and they don't go together, you then have the problem of, okay, well, now you need one source which has Noah building the ark in 7 days, right? Because if this is supposed to be an independent source, right, this is the first time that Yahweh is telling Noah to build the ark. Suddenly he has to build it in 7 days, and it has to be bigger because it's holding more animals, right? And so you have that problem. I think one of the other things that we haven't talked about much is how long it took Noah to build the ark. Usually that timeline is made because, right, so very clearly this is happening when he's 600 years old, and he's 500 years old whenever he has his 3 sons, and that's whenever God says this to him initially. And so that's why people attribute the ark to taking about 100 years. So I also wanted to specify that the 7 pairs are for sacrifices that Noah will be doing after he gets out of the ark. Um, and the main other Yeah, so I didn't bring it up. Let's let's oh, how did I find that? Nodes on timeline. Yeah, this one works good. This one's fine. Uh, this one's talking about how there's differences between the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, and the Masoretic texts, which I believe the Masoretic texts are basically what's found um, like in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Um, and so there's some differences in the numbers. Um, um, okay, so a couple of other things that I wanted to talk about. So, um, one of the big things that we kind of see in this whole story, um, uh, there's a lot of numbers. um, and so, like in the previous chapter, right there's a bunch of numbers that are about um, dealing with ordering the building of the ark. But here we have a bunch of numbers that are pertaining to time, and in particular, time for what's going on with the flood. Um, and this is one of the areas where I'm open to um, hearing other people's rationale for what's going on with these numbers and what these what like why are they being talked about here in this manner, because up until this point, we really haven't had anything that talks about specific months and days. um, uh, Everything's been kind of generally rounded out, but then here in the flood story, um, it's going to get really specific with time. um, and the argument that I want to make um, is that the specificity of the numbers, I think, is supposed to be the numbers and dealing with time is supposed to be um, aiding the, uh, in my opinion, it's supposed to be aiding the symbolic understanding of what's going on in the story uh, altogether. Um, and so the argument that I kind of want to pitch to you uh, tonight, and I guess a little bit next week, um, is that so I've already talked about how this story is a resetting of creation. It's a resetting um of the created order, and God is basically doing that through a seed. And so the ark is going to be that seed, and that's going to be the seed that uh, comes out on the other side and basically regrows the earth. Um, and I want to make a comparison between that seed and um, basic. So I think what's going on here is that there's a comparison being made, and it's not direct, and it's not exact. Um, but I think there's a comparison being made uh, with uh, like the birth of a child, right? So uh, we can see here that um, if you look at the duration of the flood, right? Let's look at this chart here. Um, so you have so here's where the flood starts. Day -7. That's when God tells basically what we read today. Is here. Um, they load in. The seed gets ready, right? And then so it has uh the waters. So it rains for 40 days. Um, uh, the waters um are basically going to cover the earth for 158 days. Um, and then the waters are going to be receding for um uh another 150 days. I think that's right. And then we'll I'll have to go back and look at that. But basically there's a big time period where the waters recede, and then there's a time period where um uh they the waters have mostly receded, but they're still hanging. So like the waters are receding. This I probably should have saved this more for next week. But the waters are receding, but they're not like totally gone, and so they stay in the ark for a little bit longer. And basically, the whole shebang takes a little bit over a year, and that's obviously longer than like the normal like uh gestation of a human child, right? But it's kind of close, right? And but I do want to argue that that whole uh that whole process, um like I think it matters that that whole process is going on because it's it's something that I talked about before whenever I relate um all of Genesis or the early chapters of Genesis to them being like innocent kids. And um one of the things that I think is going on with Genesis, well, not Genesis, but the Old Testament as a whole, is humanity is kind of going through stages, and the stages that humanity goes through at different points are mirroring stages of a human life. And so I think that's one of that. So I'm trying to kind of, I know, a little bit, admittedly, ham-fistedly, trying to map this onto one of those stages of a human life. Um, and that would be uh, I don't know if I would classify it as birth, because like then you get your order mixed up, or is as this process of like humanity kind of going like giving birth, right? Um, but
Um, I want to jump in on that
yeah,
just
go for it.
because
Well, I was going to ask if people
if
had anything they wanted to say about all that.
what I would say is that probably far from that mapping on to any kind of like relative time frame of like a gestation period. It the whole event might actually be more similar to uh like an active conception as opposed to gestation. Um, being more a separation of a seed because gestation the seed is already like taken root and then being starting to being given
Yeah,
body,
yeah, that's
and
true.
the whole period of the flood story, it's the seed being made singular and uh first being set apart, and then it's out of the flood. Can this seed actually begin to develop? So I would say it's closer to like uh, a God focusing the seed. So that's closer to like a conception than a gestation period. Um, what I would say.
There's an argument to be made there. Yeah, actually. Um, yeah, but that um, so the only other kind of number thing that I wanted to point out here, um, is the one that comes up a bunch, which is 40. Um, oh man, was that? Yeah, yeah, yeah. 40 days and 40 nights, right? Um, and this really shouldn't be that surprising, although I think this um, is this the earliest? I didn't look that up beforehand. Is this the earliest instance of 40 showing up in, well, here, let's use our handy dandy. Oh, that didn't work. Oh, yeah. Okay. So it is the first instance of 40 showing up in the text. Okay. Um, but you know, uh 40, pretty much everyone agree. So 40 is one of those numbers that shows up a lot. 40 and 400 are used in similar ways, but they're numbers that show up in the Bible repeatedly. And when people talk about biblical symbolism, it comes up a lot. And pretty much everyone agrees that like it's representative of waiting. And well, so I actually spoiled that. It's representative of uh, uh, testing or trials, like periods of trials and testing are often put into timeframes of 40s. Um, but one of the things that I've never heard on, and was one of the things that I will probably end up posting as a discussion question, that I've never gotten a satisfactory answer, is exactly why is 40 associated with these periods of trials and testing. Um, right, like we've talked before about like six and how that's kind of the number of people, um, and a man attempting to bring order, versus seven and God's order, and 10, how 10 is representative of human beings. Um, and but I've never really heard a super compelling rationale for uh 40. Um so that's one of the things I think is kind of interesting about the number, is that it's everyone agrees that there's something symbolic going on, but I've never heard a rationale for why 40 specifically. Like why is that the number, like why is 40 the number that's associated with uh periods of trial? Why not 30? Why not 35? Right? Well, why 40? Um, and For me, the thing that the kind of conclusion that I come to for why I think it is because that the common uniting thing with so like you can look up let's just do it. Examples of 40 in the Bible, right? Noah's flood, Moses on Mount Sinai, Israelite wandering, Jesus' temptation in the wilderness, Elijah's journey, spies in Canaan, um, Jonah's warning. So like there's a bunch, right? There's a ton of them. Um, and to me, the thing that kind of unites all of these, it it is actually more that I think what's going on here is that there are periods of waiting, and in particular, it's usually waiting on the Lord. Um, you're usually waiting on the Lord to do something. Um, and so because of that, my best kind of attempt for is that um, I think it has something to do with that it's a predictable even number. It's divisible by a lot of things, right? Um, and I think it has something to do with the fact that 40 is a little bit longer than a month. Like so 40 days is a little bit longer than a month. Um, and uh 40 40 years is so this is one where I'm like, this kind of breaks down on the rationale. It's a little bit longer than the average human life, especially around the time of writing these things. Um, that one, I don't think that's one of the things I'm like, I don't think that works because, yes, the average lifespan was about 35 years. Um, but that's only if you measure like from birth, right? Because a lot of people died in childbirth. If someone lived to adulthood in the ancient world, it was very common for them to still live to 50, 60, 70 years old. It's just the average lifespan was lowered mostly because of infant mortality. Um, and so that's sort of one where I'm like, I don't have a great rationale for it. But that's sort of what I think is going on there. It's periods where it's like, okay, you have to wait this period of time, but then you're waiting slightly longer than maybe what you would normally expect. Um, and so that's sort of what I think is going on, but it's not a great answer. Um, I don't know if anybody has anything else on that. No. Okay. All right. Um, okay. So then the other things that I was going to talk about. Uh, yes. Okay. And the waters prevailed mightily on the earth, and all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. Um, so I figured we would talk about this, even though um, I know that this is a point that I've hammered home before, and so maybe people don't want to talk about it. Um, but uh, the classic question of um, what was the extent of this flood, right? Um, and so the debate usually rages between um, was it a worldwide flood or was it a global flood? And so global meaning that uh, there is enough water to cover every bit of land around the surface of the entire globe. The whole world view, which is more of a Hugh Ross um, reasons to believe style of view, which is that uh, it's the whole world that is covered, and um, and that whole world basically just entails the world where human beings were living. And so it's not the entire globe, it's basically the region around um, wherever the Garden of Eden happens to be. And so in this case, somewhere in the Middle East. So covering a large portion of the Middle East, some kind of regional flood there. Um, and then And so on either one, you then have to contend with, okay, the waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits. Um, and so if you take the global um, view, the waters have to go above the highest mountain in the world, which is Mount Everest, and has to go above Mount Everest by 15 feet all the way around. Um, in order for you to believe that that's also the case, you have to also believe, at least I would think you would need to believe, that the writers are aware of Mount Everest. And that's one of the things that I'm like a little bit struggling with. Like which which mountain is this being measured off of? Um, and does the biblical author know which mountain that is? Um, and then the other option, of course, is well, if you're just talking about a regional flood, a worldwide flood, um, you have to say something along the lines of, okay, well, whenever they're saying mountains here, they can't really mean mountains. It must mean something like large hill. Now, that is an option, right? Um, they could just mean that, um, but those are the challenges that you have to deal with on whichever view you're adopting for your if you're taking a concordance view of this stuff. Um, I tend to go with the worldwide flood because I do have a concordance view, and I tend to go with the idea that the mountains that they're stating here is really just hills. And I think that whenever the author is writing all these things, such as the waters prevailed so mightily for all of the mountains under the whole heaven were covered, and even given the specific thing about the 15 cubits, I think this is literary exaggeration. Um, I, 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 I don't know of anything symbolically significant about the fact that the mountains are covered by 15 cubits of water. I don't know what that would mean as in a symbolic sense. And I also don't really know how this would have been gained or translated, or like how this like I'm not really sure where Moses got this information from. Um, this becomes one of the things of like this is sort of a thing of like, even if you go with a dictation view of the Bible, that like God is dictating this, like the stat of the 15 cubits deep, it becomes a thing where it's like, okay, God, 15 cubits deep from which mountain? It's like I don't understand why we're being specific here and then we're not being specific here. Um, and so this is one of the things where I punt to a okay. Um, I think that this is something that the author put in for rhetorical effect for saying the story, and it I don't think it means more than that, if that makes sense. Um, I don't know if anyone wants to debate me on that. Um, that was pretty much all I had for this chapter. Um, it's kind of a short one. I didn't feel like, I mean, everybody kind of knows the story of Noah. Um, I didn't think that there was much point in kind of rehashing a lot of the stuff that all of us already know. Um,
Mhm. Okay, so well, I want to talk about now. I mean, I can't speak to the significance of the 15 cubits over the mountains. 'Cause I'm yeah, like you, I'm hazy on what even the symbolic significance of 15 would be, and
yeah.
also like the dubious nature of how you would come to that measurement. Um, um, but I would also punt even further on the whole thing, and when it comes to discussing like the historicity of the event, because I would take the William Lane Craig view of like a mytho history to this, and
Sure.
then apply um like a symbolism happens view to the fact that like okay, we can debate the historicity of the story, but you can't necessarily debate the state of like a total chaotic reset, which like flood, which is something that you can bring upon um a life, a civilization, a a town, like a history of population. You can so and I think that's also the reason why there is a flood myth in like every major ancient culture.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's a example of like this is a part of the fundamental existence of man. You can't really get around it or our experiences. Um, but
And also just to say
descending over
real,
the mountains.
I was gonna say real quick, just I didn't talk too much about like comparing this to other um flood myth stuff because I was a little bit saving that for next week. Because uh I know that like the Gilgamesh story, there's a bunch of stuff to having to do with like the birds for whenever he like sets out the birds, and so we'll talk about that a little bit more like next week. But yeah.
Mhm, mhm. But in obviously the way I think about this story a lot now is absolutely impacted by having read Language of Creation, which I don't know like you've done
Hmm.
and Katie's done. So should hopefully get what I'm talking about whenever, I think the significance of the mountains here could be referring to the waters extended even above, like, the mountain of creation, um,
Yeah,
like a full cover, in which case, you can look at this like, okay, the waters rise, well, what's happening is like a flattening of the world, which, I mean, technically it is what's happening because there's one surface is what it's
yeah,
getting at, like, there's one
yeah,
level,
yeah.
and it's
It's a return
yeah,
to it's a return to waters covering the faces of the deep, right? So the earth is again
right,
formless and
well, and
void.
since the
Yeah.
heavens since the mountain of creation, like, extends, like, into the heavens, it's a blurring of those lines, right, between
Yes.
what is the waters versus what is the heavens,
And
because now
and
it's all
and
one thing.
and you could also add. So there's another thing that you get from kind of a Heiser thing, which you could also argue is going on here a little bit. Especially if you want to argue, especially if you want to argue that the flood is a judgment upon the sons of God and like the Nephilim. Um, Part of the significance about covering up the mountains might be the fact that uh, in like ancient cosmology, mountains are where the gods live, right? And so like your Olympus and you know all that stuff, right? Mountains are homes of the gods, and so even the homes of the gods are being returned back to primordial chaos. Um, to me, that's probably the most connection that you could make there to be like, oh, that this is a judgment upon like the sons of God and maybe the Nephilim by existence or by extension. But as we've already talked about last week, I have other problems with that view as to being what's going on here. But that could be part of it. Sorry,
Mhm.
that's a tangent from what you were saying because what you're saying is
Right.
not quite connected to that.
That's fine, I didn't have much more on that point. The only other thing I would say for this chapter is the instances of the number 7 in this case would be more referring, uh, more clearly to, like a God's chosen remainder, which
Yes.
is literally what's happening, amongst, like, the that is what Noah and all of the animals are becoming. They are the remainder, like, chosen by God. So that makes sense that 7 is repeated a lot, uh,
Yeah.
in Genesis 7. Um,
Um, I know this is a bit earlier than normal, but I'm actually going to go ahead and call it, and that's actually because
I have a question comment.
oh, all right, we'll go for it.
I would have made it earlier, but my hands were busy.
Oh, my child
Um,
is crying, so make it fast.
okay, well, speaking of your child crying or children, 40 weeks, I wondered if like the average length of a pregnancy, if the number 40 has something to do with that, and how you mentioned you guys were talking about, conception and the flood is like kind of resembling a birth, and I know that doesn't go as strongly with like trial and suffering, but obviously there's waiting. But I don't know. That was just a number that I thought of that maybe is worth thinking about.
Well, 40 weeks is
That is all.
about 9.2 months.
Right. My point is though, it's 40 weeks, and that's
Yep,
the number 40.
that is true. I did not think about that fully, but yes, that actually is um, right. And again, right, like a pregnancy is like a period of waiting. Um, and it's one of the things that I'm curious about because I'm like, okay, I don't really know if ancient people had I don't know if people had an ancient idea of, oh, gestation is 9 months, or did they think of gestation as being like 10 months, right? Because here's even like questions about that. Because, like, I mean, a lot of people, like go over, right? Go over by 2, sometimes even like 3 weeks. Um, and especially considering that, like, depending upon how you like measure it, um, right, you kind of have to like measure it, like you kind of measure like when you're pregnant by like your like previous like period. And so if that's what they had to go by, like depending upon how everything works out, you if you're measuring it by that, I could see where you would calculate a 10-month time frame versus a 9. And so this is sort of what I'm trying that to me is like my best educated guess as to what the connection that's being made there is. Um, I also have another idea, which I'm not fully convinced on yet, but it has to do with the idea of that um, that there's sort of the creation of time itself going on here. Um, Kind of speaking to that kind of mytho history thing, like this Genesis 6, 7, and 8 is in the middle of that mytho history portion. And I know I kind of said before, like, okay, like Cain and Abel are kind of the first humans, but Cain and Abel have this goofy thing of they don't really have real ages, right? Or they don't have ages that we perceive of as real. And Noah doesn't either quite yet, but very quickly after the flood, we're going to start getting to more reasonable ages. And also, this being the first instance of like documented like calendar months. Like I think there's something also going on here with kind of like the creation of time. And I don't know enough about that, but I know that that was like a really important thing to ancient Jews. Like I know that like the big thing with like the Essenes and like at Qumran, like the whole reason why they like their number one reason for like they went out and lived in the desert and kept their own copies of the text and hid them in caves. And their main argument that they had with other Jews was the calendar that they were using. Like, and so like calendars really mattered to Jews. Like even today, like go ask a Jew what year it is, they're going to tell you a different number than we do, right? Like calendars really matter. And so there's something also going on here with um and it's not exactly the instantiation of a calendar because like they're not like numbering it off of these stuff, right? Like they already have like the numbers going in, but it's the first example of it being used. And so I think there's something going on related to that as well, but I don't have a great answer for it.
Um, I would say that this is something that's also heavily touched upon in the language of creation,
Mhm,
in that the flooded state can be described as an excess of time.
mm,
Um, and in a in an ancient worldview. Um, and that would make sense to me that when we see the flood stories is where we start to see more of a a clear example of time being brought more to the forefront of like the events of the story.
Well, and to your
Um,
point, which I think I interrupted you on, but the point of relating it to the mountains, because the mountains are symbolic of space. And
yes.
so
So this is
it's
this is time
it's
covering
time
up space.
overtaking. Oh, time overtaking and overlapping space, and becoming
Yeah.
time is going to become the more preeminent thing. And I think in some ways you could also kind of relate this, and I think it sort of makes sense, and I think it is almost intentional on um, like Tolkien's part. So if you think of like the history of Middle Earth or whatever, right? He has this point at which um, uh, like what is it, like the land of the gods, um versus Middle Earth, um
Mhm.
and like he does that by a flood, right? I'm
Yeah,
correct on that, right? Yeah, like he has a flood,
essentially correct. Yeah.
and but also like it turns the world from being flat into being round, right? And
Mhm.
it's very obvious that Tolkien is trying to like connect that to Atlantis, but it's also trying to connect it to like Noah, right? And so there's this idea of um and so this kind of also leads you into the idea of what I think his idea is this something of like, okay, like how come we haven't found the Garden of Eden yet? Because shouldn't we be able to find this place where there's a flaming sword like flying around out in front of it? And it's like, well, maybe that cosmic mountain is like disconnected from us now, and we had this like chaotic flood event, and that's the thing that kind of really started time. And I also think that this is one of the things that I also think is sort of a weird thing about the whole Answers in Genesis thing, is that everybody has this whole argument about whether or not um, all human beings could come from a single pair, whenever in reality the actual argument from a biblical standpoint is, well, actually, can all human beings come from about 8 people? Because that's the actual bottleneck, um, before it goes out. Uh, so um, so I you could argue that that like Noah is kind of like the actual creation story, right? Or something along those lines.
Yeah, missed opportunity by C.S. Lewis to not go around calling all of
Yeah,
the
sons and daughters
what
of Noah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Well, he did it because he called them daughters of Eve,
daughters of
but,
Eve. You would have to actually
you would do
know
sons of Noah.
Noah's
Yeah,
wife's
what's
name.
Noah's wife's name?
It was whatever that the guess or whatever was from whatever it was from that one genealogy. But all right, well, I have to go. Uh, thank you all. Sorry for the shortened lesson.